That's horrifying. That's not concerning. Right? I mean, I don't drink coffee, but don't. Hey, you said you quit. You can't defend Duncan anymore. Weak, weak. Anyway, um, so we're at the start of essentially the Middle Ages now, um, which is still this is chapter 6. We are this is slide 8, so we won't get too far into it. Um, but once we finish this chapter, it'll be time for a test again. So yeah, I'll make sure that all the PowerPoints are up, and I'll put the study guide up, and we'll have a review day. So we'll do that. But like I said, um, compared to the previous test, this one will at least be more concise. It won't feel as all over the place, which, I mean, YouTube did fine. Um, but yeah, this will be early Rome, Roman Republic, and then like late Rome into the early Middle Ages. So, um, we ended with Diocletian turning the empire into this weird tetrarchy thing, where you had four rulers, well, two primary rulers, then two like secondary rulers under them, splitting the empire into four parts. And to really show how important the East had become, Diocletian took, where's my mouse go? Took this section rather than, you know, Rome. So yeah, Diocletian's over here. Now, technically, Byzantium wasn't the capital yet. This will come later. It's Nicomedia. Yeah. Um. So, yeah, this is what we're looking at. And then there's the one of the few images we have of like the tetrarchs, because they didn't last too long. So, Diocletian and Maximian stepped down. Maximian was Diocletian's. Oh no, Maximian was the Augustus of Italy. Okay. So the two Augusti stepped down, and rather than things moving forward smoothly, everything fell apart. The Caesar in charge of Britain, who was Constantine's father, Constantius, because, naming, he died in 306, but Constantine hadn't technically been named heir, so he did the mature thing and took his father's army and started a civil war. Because apparently that's just what you did in Rome. I mean, we've seen this happen several times now. So in 312, at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, he defeated Maxentius. However, and this is again another one of these reports from the time period that may have been embellished over the years because of how important it is to future power. Supposedly, he fought under a Christian banner and dedicated this victory to the Christian God. And he was like, well, if we win this battle, then I'll dedicate it to the Christian God, and that's the one we'll follow, I guess. And it worked out. And so they did. And the next year, he and Licinius, who was another rival for the throne of Rome, I guess. I keep wanting to say the throne of England. I'm too far ahead in my brain. They issued the Edict of Milan. This created an official toleration for Christians, reversed a lot of the anti-Christian laws that were in place. We'll get to another later edict that is a lot more important in terms of what it does for Western Christendom. So we've got this extraordinarily inaccurate image here of Constantine in Austrian attire. This is medieval armor. This is not what he'd been wearing. This is the Austrian flag on his back. Now, to be fair, the reason why they use that is because what he did was sort of the start of the Holy Roman Empire, which was built around Austria by the time this painting was commissioned, so that's why they went with that. But yeah, this is medieval stuff. Also, they're using the cross as the symbol for the Christian God, which, that's what we understand it as today. That wouldn't have been what they used back then. They would have used an X, which is the Greek symbol it's like the Christoform, which is, I think, is Greek for basically their CHI, which is the first part of Christ, or CHR, whatever. Anyway, that's why, when you see, if people are going to shorten Christmas, they put Xmas. They're not taking the Christ out of Christmas. The X literally means Christ. That's not, we're taking this out because we're pagans and we're trying to insult Christ. That's literally an old Greek and Roman symbol for Christ. FYI. But, you can't expect people to do thinking in the modern day. Who is texting me? Fish stew, hell yeah. That's what I like. I'm getting fish stew from my mother, whose name is also Fish Stew. Now, I do want to point out one thing here, though. Notice this angel is not in white. This is a red angel. Anybody want to, out of the lot of you that are in here, anybody want to throw out a guess for that? I don't know how. No. No. I mean, sort of. This is a specific archangel. You guys familiar with that at all? Like Michael? Yes. specifically.
Specifically Michael?
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah. Um, yeah, there because the different archangels were represented by various symbols, sometimes just the color of what they were wearing or their wings, and they represented different things. In some cases, literally winning wars. Um, and so yeah, he was there watching Constantine's back in this case. Um, so yeah, that's why the angel there is in red, not just like they goofed on everything else. Let's put the angel in red. No, they're very specific about that. So that part at least, I'm not gonna complain about. Okay, do. History paper, yeah, da da da. Okay, just making sure I'm not getting any important messages. Fair enough. Hey, wherever you learn it, wherever you learn it from, I don't mind. Shoot, I know way more things than I'm comfortable admitting from like video games. So, um, anyway, so due to Constantine, essentially converting to Christianity, or at least um, pulling his new empire towards Christianity, it was going to be difficult to go back to Rome because Rome was full of temples to other gods, and I mean full of them. Um, if you recall, whenever the Romans went out and like conquered a new city, they would take the altars from that city and bring them back to Rome and put them in Rome. So it wasn't just like the dozen or so, or more, I should say, a couple of dozen gods that like the Romans had in the Roman pantheon. You may be thinking of that they just stole from the Greeks, but like a bunch of other gods from just like random cities around Rome. So Rome was chock full of temples and altars and stuff. So rather than like flatten Rome and start over, um, he just like screw it. We're just gonna start. We're just gonna have a new capital. So he made his way to Byzantine, which he renamed Constantinople over there in the east. I pointed that out just a minute ago on the map. Um, which he named, well, it was renamed Constantinople, but it became like a new Rome. Um, it retained all the civic structures of old Rome, forums, senates, the Senate, etc., but they didn't have pagan temples. So as head of the empire, Constantine was also head of the church, and there was this whole thing at the Council of Nicaea, um, settling a dispute about Christ's nature, whether he was equal to or subordinate to the Father, and setting the ground for what would eventually become known as the Trinity at the Council of Nicaea. So actually, 325, the whole Trinity thing isn't actually biblical doctrine. Which is weird because, again, I was like raised in all that and it was just sort of understood. But yeah, that came up later because there was a lot of confusion as to like how this all worked out, because technically Christianity is supposed to be a monotheistic religion, but you've got like God and Jesus and then this like Holy Ghost character that shows up, and also technically like all these angels and also Satan and all his demons, and it's like, okay, there's a lot of characters for a monotheistic religion. It's like, well, actually, it's just the one. Don't worry about it. Also, I think it was the Council of Nicaea, where they decided what books were going to be in the Bible. And they threw a lot of them out. There's a lot of books that just never made it to the Bible because they weren't deemed acceptable. So, there's a lot of, what are they called, apocryphal books that were just by definition, just like aren't canon. air quotes, um, that are out there and are canon in some versions of Christianity or etc. um, and that's where it starts getting weird, where it's like you have like modern day. Most Protestants don't uh, adhere to, say, the Book of Enoch, for example. But if you ask, say, like, I'm going to pick on a Southern Baptist because my grandmother is Southern Baptist. If you ask, like, a Southern Baptist why the flood happened, if they get beyond just, like, well, there was bad stuff on earth, and they go into the whole, like, the Nephilim and the angels banging the human women, like, that's all Book of Enoch. That's all stuff that's not actually in at least most Protestant Bibles. But, yeah, just saying. Biblical history is interesting. So here is the expanse of the empire by 117 AD. So again, you've got Rome over here. Here's Byzantium, which of course will eventually become Constantinople. So this was going to be the new capital, which, as you can see from the geography, isn't exactly the center of the empire anymore. But it's more focused on everything over here, which is where all their money is coming from. So, Constantine kicked the bucket in 337. His three sons took over, and this was before primogeniture, which is something, that's maybe not a word you're familiar with, but if you're familiar at all with, like, royalty in Europe, that's where, the oldest son gets everything and everybody else is out of luck. Here, everything's split among the sons. So they have to play nice, or they have to kill each other, and whoever is not dead gets everything. So they killed each other until one was left, Constantius II. Apparently Constantius didn't have any sons of his own, so he raised his cousin Julian to fight Germans in the West, because, well, the Germans, which is to say the barbarians, were causing trouble in the West, which we will very much get to. However, Julian renounced Christianity in 361, was named an apostate, and essentially was turned on by the empire. Marched on Constantinople, because that's just what you do. You just march on the capital when you have an issue with the empire. Before he got there, the emperor died, and now technically Julian was in charge. So, I don't know, man. The way this is like, oh, you're an enemy of the empire. Oh wait, the emperor's dead. You're the emperor now. You would think, like, starting a civil war and being an enemy of the empire would disqualify you from being the next emperor? I don't know. However, even though he was not a Christian and was, presumably against Christianity, he did not renew persecution against Christianity and was not really able to turn back the entrenchment of Christianity within Roman tradition, because even though it had only been a couple of generations now since Constantine, the Roman culture had really latched onto it. So by 392, um, Emperor Theodosius was leading state-sponsored eradication of pagan religions. So within, I mean, not even a century, um, we were going from persecution of Christianity to persecution of anything that wasn't Christianity, and also anything that wasn't the right kind of Christianity. But we'll get to that later. Right. All right, this was a common thing. Um, Christian churches, for instance, were erected on the sites of pagan holy places so that pagans might see both the triumph of Christianity and yet continue to associate those sites with their older aura of holiness. Um, yeah, this was a common thing. This happened in Ireland a lot, where the um, the Christians came in and just like built churches on top of the pagan holy sites, except for at the Hill of Tara, they built a church over to the side. Um, they didn't bulldoze the hill. Interestingly enough. So when it came to the Germanic tribes, um, they weren't really just floods of conquerors coming in to take over Roman lands. Most wanted to come in and join the Roman Empire. Wanted to come in and, I mean, not necessarily become, good Romans. Um, Many became mercenaries because, hey, we're good at fighting and we can get paid for it. Great. Others, though, did just want to come in and become citizens. It's like, hey, come in and farm and be protected by Rome. Great. Easy. No problem here. In 376, we had the Visigoths, one of the many groups of these Germans. They requested permission to head into cross the Danube and settle into the empire because they were trying to escape the Huns. That was the reason for the Germans pushing into Rome. They weren't trying to take land from the Romans. They were trying to get away from the Huns, because the Huns were pushing out of Russia and into Europe, because they had already conquered all of China and were, yeah, they had all of China, all of Russia, and we're now pushing into Europe. I've got a map here in a little bit to show just how big their empire was. It was insane. The size we're looking at. Like, to this day, we've never had an empire, a single contiguous empire as large as the Mongol Empire. So yeah, so Emperor Valens gave them land, but it wasn't very good for farming, and if you're going to be stuck on a piece of land to live there, you need to be able to farm it to survive. Eventually the Visigoths rose up, they killed Valens, and then the next emperor, Theodosius, gave them more autonomy, basically setting them up as allies rather than like vassals in Rome. So here we have, this is supposedly the Visigoths. You've got these silly winged helmets that definitely didn't exist, but yeah. Old art. here's the battle where Valens died, I believe. This is an old bas relief. All right. So the Romans knew they couldn't just like defeat all these Germans in battle. That wasn't going to be possible. There were just too damn many of them. Um, so the idea was just to put them somewhere that wasn't by the Mediterranean, because that's where all the Romans had their stuff. So like, okay, well, we've still technically got a lot of land. We've got all that land up in Gaul, um, up in like northwestern Roman territory. We'll just put them up there. They'll be fine. Just away from our stuff. Um, Still, though, it was difficult for a lot of these tribes that were used to just like raiding and taking things to survive to put down roots and become farmers. So many of them went back to raiding and taking things from their neighbors. Also, many of these tribes were sent to the western portions of the empire to fight other Germans who were more aggressive and less likely to play nice with the Romans. And while this worked to some degree because it kept the Germans out of the east where the actual capital was, it was making things harder and harder on the west, where not only were there lots of Germans, but there's now less power structure in the west, and it's being hollowed out while they're putting more pressure on it. So they're making it. The fall of the Western Roman Empire is coming, and they're making it worse. So we've got here, Magna Germania, which is just to say, this is where all the Germans are. This is all the different German tribes and whatnot, and they're being pushed, to be fair, into this region of Rome. And rather than letting them come down here, because they were crossing the Black Sea as well, they were being pushed into this region. It's like, okay, well, you guys can go over here. That's fine. Well, obviously, they were also pushing down this way, but as long as they stayed out of Constantinople, the Romans didn't really care. So they were putting pressure on this region, which put pressure on Rome, which didn't really have a whole lot of support anymore. Which led to Rome getting sacked again. Rome was burned and looted in 410 by the Visigoths. After they sieged Vienna, Ravenna, which had kind of been the capital of the Western Roman Empire anyway. So the Western Roman Empire wasn't even run by Rome anymore. Rome was kind of abandoned almost. I mean, people still lived there. It was still a relatively rich city. But Ravenna had been the capital. And the siege by the Visigoths against Ravenna did fail. So then they just went over and sacked Rome because Rome was an easier target. Which is saying something, considering, Rome's supposed to be this big thing, but not anymore. However, their main goal was not Rome, but Northern Africa. That was the breadbasket of the empire. That's where all their grain was being grown. Because, again, Northern Africa wasn't like just the Sahara, especially when you're further east, keep having a hard time with east and west when it comes to stuff over in Europe and Asia. But when you're like towards Egypt, that's really, really rich land. That's really, really good for growing stuff, especially, towards the Nile. Um, so they wanted to get down there where you can grow all this food and you can survive really, really well. So in 429, we had the Vandals, another group of German tribes, who captured a Roman fleet and sailed down to northern Africa. And then for shits and giggles, they went back up to Rome in 455 and sacked it for fun, I guess. Also, just in case you didn't catch it, that's clearly where we get the word vandalism from. Just we took the tribe name and made it to mean breaking stuff and like defacing things. So yeah, we just straight up took a German tribe name. Now, as I said, the main reason that we have all these Germanic tribes pushing into Rome was not that they were aggressive or wanting to take land or, just, we're bloodthirsty barbarians. They were trying to get the hell away from the Huns. They were terrifying. The Huns were this unstoppable force coming in on horseback, and you could do nothing about them. They were led by Attila after 445, and the Germans and the Romans and everybody in between tried to fight them, and it was a slaughter. In open combat, they run you down with horses. If you try to retreat, they wouldn't just run you down, but they would stay at just far enough away from you with their horses and bows to pelt you with arrows, but too far away for you to actually hit back. If you try to retreat, they would chase you. They would often ride with multiple horses for one person, so that when that horse they were riding on got tired, they would just switch to another horse so they could ride crazy distances in very short periods of time, so you never knew where they were going to hit. They used horrendous tactics when it came to sieging cities. If you refused to just surrender, they would use catapults and just launch bodies filled with plague into your city and then let you die of plague. So yeah, they were really, really tough, really hard to mess with. Eventually, though, Attila did die in 453, and it's not entirely certain what happened, but we're pretty sure Rome sent in some assassins and managed to take him out, which is pretty impressive that they managed to get that done. As paranoid as Attila was. But because he was such a charismatic leader, once he died, his sons weren't really able to keep things together, and the empire started to fall apart. So here we have the Vandals in Rome getting ready to tear down a statue. Just because. Actually, there's a very, very funny. I'm sure some of you may have seen it. There's a version of this. I mean, it's this exact image, but rather than big naked German dudes, it's girls in full goth attire tearing down the statue because, again, they were Visigoths. So, the old Goths. The only picture I could find for the Siege of Ravenna was from Rome 2 Total War, so there you go. I guess they had these siege towers back then. It makes sense. They're not super high-tech. Um, and then there's this one. So if you recall from previous images of like Rome sacking cities and taking all their stuff, they were it, having this great time taking things from, say, Jerusalem or just whatever other cities they were sacking. But now it's Rome getting sacked, and so we need to be sad. We need to be depressed that, oh no, Rome's getting sacked. We're all sad that this great city is being plundered by barbarians. It's like, come on, guys. I mean, this would be like London being sacked and them taking all the stuff that Rome had originally stolen, or Britain had originally stolen from other countries. And here we have, this is supposed to be, I think this was when the Pope, because we had a Pope at the time, sent an envoy to the Huns to like try to talk him out of the everything that was going on, which you can see very clearly here. Like even just the sky, this difference in like you've got the good Romans and the good Christians here with literally, I guess that's Michael and maybe Gabriel. And then meanwhile over here you've got the barbaric Huns, and literally the sky is dark and spooky and demonic because, oh, scary barbaric Huns. Yeah. They weren't very subtle in their symbolism. And, toss that in there too. Oh yeah, and there was also the one from Night at Museum. Do I have the picture up? Yeah, baby. And this is just within Rome. Damn it. This is just within Europe. Because it goes, do I have the picture of? Yes. This was the difference. This was the difference in the Roman Empire and what the Mongols had.
How did they manage all of that?
Lots and lots of, well, initially it was Genghis Khan. And Genghis Khan had a lot of children. So he had a lot of like regional rulers that just, a lot of human ancestry can be traced back to Genghis Khan. Yeah. Yeah, so he had a lot of like his own family running regional stuff. And then, as you can see here, Attila attended the push into Europe. I mean, they got all the way to the Danube, but eventually, died with the assassination plot. But they were pushing well into Rome, so it wasn't just they were pushing out the Germans. The Huns themselves were pushing into everywhere. So yeah, it was pretty crazy. Now that said, just like you asked, how did they manage all that? Not very well, because once the big leader died, everyone else typically fought over what was left, and then it collapsed. So this didn't last very long, but it was really crazy that it got that big. Actually, I might be getting this wrong. Attila was before Genghis Khan, because his son's Kublai Khan, he was involved in the push against Japan later on. That's in like the 1200s. So yeah, this is earlier. So Genghis Khan, big Mongol Empire, he dies, that falls apart, but it resurfaces in about 1,000 years, or no, 400. So about 800 years. So yeah, just a quick peek into what we're not going to be talking about is like all this stuff happening over in Asia, because we're going to be sticking with Western Europe, but there's a lot of crazy stuff happening over there. 475, Senate elected Romulus Augustulus as emperor. That almost sounds like that. It sounds like a parody name. Romulus Augustulus. Is like really? However, the Germans kicked him out. They put their king Odovacar on the throne and said they didn't really need an emperor. Italy was still considered part of the empire, but the Germans were in power. And this heralded the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD. Important year. Hint, hint. 476 is considered the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and essentially the start of the Middle Ages. Now, depends on what historian you talk to, because we can't agree on anything. But most historians see 476 as the start of the Middle Ages, the fall of the Western Roman Empire as the start of the Middle Ages, and the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire, which is like 1,000 years later, as the end of the Middle Ages. So they're pretty decent bookends. You can go back and forth on what actually is what. I go with it. It was good enough. And since the center of the empire has shifted to Constantinople, and much of the empire to the west was now under German control, we still had Rome, the empire, even if we didn't have Rome, the city. And like I said, it's on page 184 and 185 if you had the book, but I don't know how many people actually can get the book anymore. So here's all the various pushes from the various groups. Ostrogoths and just the Goths in general, Vandals, Huns, Franks, Anglo-Saxons, and Jutes over there to Britannia. As you can see, the Vandals went down, took Carthage, and then they just decided to go out and break stuff anyway, because that's just what they were good at. We'll be looking at a number of these groups, the Visigoths, Ostrogoths. The Franks are very important here before too long. We'll, of course, talk about the Angles and Saxons a little bit later as well, because they create the Anglo-Saxons. What do you know? Yeah. So we've got Rome starting to shrink. Rome's no longer all of this. It's being pushed out of Europe proper. You've got all this land that's now really being controlled by the Germans. This part up here, the Frankish kingdom, will get that's real important for what's coming up. Let's see, the Lombards, who very much get into northern Italy. I mean, there's a whole region of northern Italy called Lombardy today. We don't talk about the Gephids, so don't worry about them. Visigoths. Where's the Ostrogoths? Not well. So, what happened with all these guys? So the Vandals had control over northern Africa. You know, they were on the ruins of old Constantinople. And were seen as allies, which is to say we weren't, and by we I mean Rome, wasn't like actively at war with them. However, they rejected Orthodox Christianity. This is another thing with like Constantine. It was not just he made Christianity like the official religion of Rome, but they pushed towards an orthodoxy So other types of Christianity were now considered just as bad as like pagan religions. So um, the Vandals had, let's see, it was a do 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 do. They were Arian Christians, Arian, not what happens in Germany in the 30s. So because they were not Orthodoxy Christians, they were overthrown by the 6th century because when the Romans rolled in, which we'll get to later, the people helped to overthrow them because they didn't want to be under this wrong kind of Christianity. Because now that most of the pagan religions are gone, being the wrong kind of Christianity is now the thing we've got to be worried about. The Visigoths were in Spain. They converted to Roman Orthodoxy in 589 when King Record converted. So the thing about the Germans and Christianity are really not just Christianity, but like with religion in general in this period. Whatever the ruler did was considered what all the people did. There really wasn't an idea of like personal religious practices. You just did whatever your tribe did, and your tribe did whatever the king did. So if the king converted to whatever, cool, that's what your tribe's doing, and therefore that's what you're doing. That was just part of the culture. I was going to make some sports analogy, but I don't know sports teams, so I don't know. If I made a sports analogy, it'd be something from the Late Show. So like, oh, you're the King's a Mets fan now. I guess we're Mets fans now. And then you'd make some joke about them being a bad team. But I don't know. Maybe the Mets is a good team. Who knows? I don't know sports. Well, when in doubt, the Bears. The Bears. So, oh no, the Jets. That's the really bad team that Seth Meyers has always given a hard time. So, the Ostrogoths were Arian Christians, therefore, quote, not the right kind of Christians. And their ruler, Theodoric, was pretty enlightened. He was pretty forward-thinking for a German in the 500s. And they were doing pretty well. However, Clovis of the Franks converted to Orthodoxy, and his people were basically surrounded by Orthodox Christian Germans, which meant war was about to happen. The new Emperor Justin openly declared Arians as heretics and thus persecuted them. So Theodoric planned to go to war with the Franks, but then died in 526 of dysentery because it's still the 500s and people just die of their guts going wrong. So yeah, it's unfortunate because the Ostrogoths were a pretty good, I don't want to say this without sounding like really pretentious. They were like really civilized for a German barbarian tribe, like even to the Romans, who typically did not write very highly of the Germans. But like, yeah, these Ostrogoths are pretty good dudes. Unfortunately, they're the wrong kind of Christians, so we have to murder them all. But yeah, unfortunately, they didn't end up so well. So Visigoths over here. This is Visigoths, but it's Germans and Visigoths. Again, the Subs, which we're not going to talk too much about. Burgunds. Actually, there is the Burgundy family in France, so I guess they stuck around enough. The Franks, of course, Saxons, Jutes, Angles, etc. The Danes, of course, the Slavs, the Balts. So these are more Rus rather than German. Lombardies, there's the Ostrogoths down here that had a lot of power. And then, of course, the Celts, which are a whole separate thing. All right, let's get a little further, and then we can call it before I get too far into it. But we need to talk about Clovis, because he is so important to how things go with, like, all of Europe going forward. Like, everything we talk about for the next 3 chapters when it comes to, like, the Middle Ages is, if not directly because of this guy, at least indirectly because of this guy. So, there was a western tribe of Germanic people known as the Franks. They weren't really interested in going down to the Mediterranean, and therefore didn't really mess with the Romans. And so they settled up in Gaul, which, modern-day France, hence, Franks, the name. And since they didn't mess with the Romans liked them a lot because, a good neighbor is one that doesn't bother you. Clovis became king at 15, heir to the Merovingian line of kings. We'll be talking about the Merovingians a little bit later. Just kind of keep that in mind. They got along with the church, provided security, while the church dealt with social issues through charity. So they would keep the church safe from, let's face it, other tribes that would try to steal stuff from the church, because the church was where all the gold was. And then the church would take care of the poorer members of the tribe through charity and whatnot. Which is to say, he and his men would go out and raid churches from other tribes and then bring the wealth back to, I was getting ahead of myself. Yeah. So the Arians and Orthodox Christians both wanted Clovis on their side because he was really good at controlling the Franks, particularly on churches that he raided outside of Gaul, because, again, that's where all the money was. And I think I might have talked about this before, or at least I mentioned it with the consuls. Traditionally, if you were the ruler of not just like a Germanic tribe, but really the Romans or any of these groups, if you were a ruler and you led men in battle and you conquered something, you took a village, or in this case a church or monastery, whatever, and you took all the loot from it, traditionally, you as the ruler, as the person who was leading the battle, and typically I mean leading from the front, you would get about 50% of the loot, and then the rest of it will be split up among your men. However, Clovis would then take his 50% and then take about half of that and then use it to reward his, officers, essentially, his lieutenants, his men that were leading their own groups within his army, and made them very, very loyal to him, because he wasn't just taking all the glory and winning all the battles, he was showing them that he appreciated their loyalty and their skill in battle, so they therefore became more loyal to him, and that made him a very powerful king, because a king is only as powerful as his subjects, and if his subjects don't want him on the throne, they're just going to get rid of him. Eventually, though, Clovis chose orthodoxy on the eve of a battle sometime between 496 and 498, and this is a big deal for really the rest of Western civilization because of how big of an impact the Franks had on Western Europe and how it would eventually mesh with the Holy Roman Empire and the rise of Catholicism and all of that. So we have here, you've got the Ostrogoths up in northern Rome, Clovis here with the Franks. They push a bit into here. We're actually not sure how much of this was actually going on. Saxons and the Frisians and all of this. Here is this has got to be like Renaissance era because there's actually like depth perception happening. This is the baptism, I guess, of Clovis. And you can see some pretty obvious parallels here. Anybody want to throw out a pretty obvious a bit of pretty obvious symbolism here for Clovis? Very, very, very Jesus-like symbolism here. But beyond that, what else is Clovis symbolizing? Because this isn't a photograph. This isn't what he 100% looked like. This is what the artist is depicting him as. So what else is he representing in this image? Well, yeah, with the baptism, but like, what else does he have that might represent something that he, as a Germanic ruler, might represent? What's that? Yeah, I mean, he's still a Germanic ruler. He's still leading the Franks. And not just, as a ruler, but as a warrior. He led from the front. He was taking heads. So while he was being baptized as an Orthodox Christian, he was still a warrior. He was still out there swinging his axe, doing the job. And you've got his men over here in like animal skins because they were lower rank. They didn't have this like fancy armor, which this fancy armor didn't really exist back then. But again, don't worry about it. So on this side you've got like his tribesmen. On this side you've got like the church people, and he's sort of this like middle ground, more refined looking, but still part of this like wild Germanic tribesman sort of thing. So yeah, it's a pretty good image. Again, not 100% accurate, but accuracy isn't really important if you're going for symbolism. So that's what we're going for here. We're almost we're getting close to the end of the chapter, so we're just going to end that here because we do need to talk about Justinian and Theodora, and there's so much happening in the Eastern Roman Empire. So I'll go ahead and probably put this PowerPoint up on Blackboard as well as the study guide, just so we can have. We won't do the study guide next time. Even if we finish the chapter, we'll just finish the day early, I guess, and then do the study guide next week. So yeah, that'll do it for that. This is, again, the Germanic tribes become the Germanic tribes absorbing into the Roman culture become the Middle Ages. So that's the important thing we're talking about here. So yeah, that's that.